In the hushed twilight of a Christmas night, a sudden blizzard descended, draping the world in a veil of white. In a humble, almost forgotten diner, Kesha battled against the relentless cold. The electricity was gone, the heater broken, and her 2-year-old son, Marcus, shivered in her arms. Just as despair threatened to engulf her, a rumble echoed through the storm. 25 figures materialized out of the swirling snow, Hell's angels silhouetted against the dim light of her diner, seeking refuge from the unforgiving night. Fear battled with compassion in Kesha's heart, but her inherent warmth won. She opened her doors, unaware that this single act of kindness would ignite a chain of events, summoning a thunderous wave of 1,500 motorcycles to her doorstep just 3 days later, forever altering not only her life, but the destiny of an entire community. Before we journey back to that fateful night, take a moment to consider where you're listening from, and perhaps consider subscribing, for tomorrow holds a story even more extraordinary. The clock above the worn kitchen sink ticked away the slow hours, each one a stark reminder of Kesha's solitude. It read 3:47 a.m. when she finally sank into a chair, her weary body aching for rest. Her hands, roughened by relentless work, trembled as she counted the meager pile of bills scattered across the wooden table. $7.32. That was all that stood between her beloved Marcus and the gnawing hunger that awaited him with the dawn. Kesha pressed her palms against her tired eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion seep into her very bones. At only 32, life had etched its harsh realities onto her face, adding years to her appearance. Her once vibrant dark skin had lost its youthful glow, replaced by the dull sheen of someone who toiled tirelessly in 3 jobs just to keep afloat. The small house around her creaked and groaned in the winter wind, a constant reminder of her isolated existence. Marcus slept peacefully in the corner of the kitchen, curled up in a makeshift bed fashioned from old blankets and faded couch cushions. The heater in his bedroom had given out weeks ago, and she couldn't afford the repairs, so she kept him close where the warmth from the stove offered some comfort. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, completely unaware of the financial storms threatening to consume them both. Their house stood isolated at the end of Maple Street in Detroit, separated from the other homes by an empty lot, unwanted and forgotten. It was as if the neighborhood had deliberately pushed her to the fringes, mirroring the way life had treated her. The white families who lived in the nicer houses further down the street rarely acknowledged her presence. When they did, it was usually with furtive glances or whispered conversations that abruptly ceased as she walked by. "Why did you have to leave us, Jerome?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ancient refrigerator. Her ex-husband had walked out 8 months ago, claiming he needed to find himself. He had found himself all right, living with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee, conveniently forgetting the child support payments meant to keep his son fed and sheltered. The divorce papers sat in a dusty folder atop the refrigerator, stamped with red ink that might as well have been blood for all the pain they represented. Suddenly, Kesha's phone buzzed against the table, startling her. A text message from her manager at the cleaning company flashed on the screen. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow. We're letting you go. Your kid was crying too much during your shift yesterday. Customers complained." The words struck her like a physical blow. She stared at the message, rereading it again and again, desperately hoping the letters would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. That was the 3rd job she had lost in just 2 months. The laundromat had fired her when Marcus got sick, and she had no choice but to bring him to work. The diner had let her go after she fell asleep during her shift, a consequence of working 18 hours straight between all 3 jobs. "How am I supposed to work if I can't find anyone to watch you, baby?" she asked, gazing at her sleeping son. Daycare was a luxury she couldn't afford, a staggering $200 a week. Family support was non-existent since her mother's passing 3 years earlier, taking with her the last person who truly understood Kesha's struggles. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, stern yet loving. "Kesha, honey, remember what I taught you about my grandmother's fried chicken recipe? That secret blend of spices has been in our family for generations. One day, when times get tough, that recipe might just save you." At the time, Kesha had smiled and nodded, never imagining she would need salvation from a handful of herbs and spices. But now, sitting in her cold kitchen with her last $7, her mother's words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She walked to the old wooden cabinet where she kept her mother's recipe box. The index cards inside were yellowed with age, covered in her mother's careful handwriting. The fried chicken recipe was there, along with detailed instructions for sides and sauces that made her mouth water just reading them. Her mother had run a small soul food restaurant when Kesha was young, before the neighborhood changed and the customers stopped coming. Maybe it's time to try again, she said to herself, though doubt immediately crept into her voice. The next morning, Kesha used her last $7 to buy chicken and basic ingredients. She set up 2 folding tables in her living room, creating a makeshift dining area next to her tiny kitchen. She crafted a handwritten menu on poster board and propped it against the front window. Mama's Kitchen, it read in careful letters. Authentic soul food made with love. Marcus sat in his high chair, babbling happily as the aroma of perfectly seasoned fried chicken filled the house. The secret lay in the blend of spices her mother had taught her, a combination that made the coating crispy and flavorful in a way that evoked sighs of pure satisfaction. But as the hours passed, reality began to sink in. She watched through her window as people walked by on their way to the bus stop. Some slowed down when they saw the menu in her window, but when they saw her dark face through the glass, they quickened their pace and looked away. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down actually stopped and read the entire menu. Kesha felt a surge of hope and rushed to open the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. Would you like to try some of my fried chicken? It's made from my grandmother's recipe." Mrs. Henderson's expression changed the moment she saw Kesha's face. The older white woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion and something that looked uncomfortably like disgust. "I don't think so," she said, backing away from the door. "I heard about you. Single mother, no husband around. Probably don't even know who the father is. I don't eat food from people like that." The words cut deep, but Kesha forced herself to keep smiling. "The food is really good, ma'am. I promise it's clean and fresh." "I said, no," Mrs. Henderson snapped. "And you shouldn't be running a business out of your house. This is a decent neighborhood. Keep your kind of trouble to yourself." Kesha watched her neighbor storm away, her chest tight with humiliation and anger. She closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of rejection settle over her like a heavy blanket. Marcus looked up at her from his high chair, his innocent eyes wide and trusting. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, picking him up and holding him close. "Mama's going to figure this out. I promise." But as she looked around her empty restaurant, smelling the delicious food that no one wanted to buy, Kesha wondered if some promises were too big for one person to keep. Outside, the Detroit winter pressed against her windows, and inside, the isolation felt just as cold. The phone rang again. Another bill collector, no doubt. She let it go to voicemail, knowing she had nothing to tell them that they wanted to hear. Tomorrow, she would have to find another job, assuming anyone would hire a single black mother with a history of bringing her child to work. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand, as if he could sense her sadness. "Mama," he said, one of the few words he knew clearly. "I'm here, baby," she replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. She refused to let them fall. "Mama's right here." As the afternoon light faded through her windows, Kesha Williams held her son close and wondered how much longer she could keep fighting a world that seemed determined to keep her down. The scent of her mother's fried chicken recipe lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of dreams that felt increasingly out of reach. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Henderson's cruel words, and Kesha's small restaurant venture had attracted exactly 4 customers. 4 brave souls who had tasted her mother's fried chicken recipe and declared it the best they had ever eaten. But 4 customers couldn't pay the rent or keep the lights on, and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table had grown taller each day. December 23rd arrived under an ominous gray sky that promised trouble. The weather reports had been warning about it for days, the worst snowstorm to hit Detroit in 20 years. Kesha stood at her kitchen window, watching the first flakes begin to fall as she stirred a pot of chicken and dumplings. At least she had managed to stock up on supplies before the storm hit. The few customers she had served had given her just enough money to buy ingredients in bulk, thinking optimistically about the Christmas rush that never came. "Mama cold," Marcus said from his high chair, rubbing his small hands together. Kesha turned up the heat on the stove and wrapped her son in an extra blanket. The house felt colder than usual, but she assumed it was just the approaching storm. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with increasing intensity. By evening, the snow was falling in thick sheets that obscured everything beyond her front yard. The weather had become so severe that even the few cars that normally passed by her isolated house had disappeared completely. The silence was eerie, broken only by the howling wind and the occasional crack of tree branches bending under the weight of accumulating snow. Kesha fed Marcus his dinner and got him ready for bed, trying to ignore the growing cold that seemed to seep through the walls. She had turned the thermostat up twice, but the house didn't feel any warmer. A nagging worry began to form in the back of her mind. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke to a house that felt like a freezer. Her breath formed visible clouds in the air, and Marcus was shivering uncontrollably despite being bundled in every blanket she owned. She rushed to the thermostat and found it displaying an error message she had never seen before. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing buttons frantically. "Not now, please. Not now." She tried calling the heating repair service, but the automated message informed her that due to the severe weather conditions, all non-emergency calls would be handled after the storm passed. Emergency calls had a 72-hour wait time. 72 hours, she said aloud, staring at her phone in disbelief. Marcus began to cry, a thin, wailing sound that made her heart clench with panic. She picked him up and held him close, feeling how cold his little body had become despite the layers of clothing. The power went out that afternoon with a sudden click that plunged the house into darkness. Kesha fumbled for candles and matches, her hands shaking from both cold and fear. The few flickering flames provided minimal light and even less warmth. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that seemed almost supernatural, as if nature itself was determined to test her resolve. She moved Marcus into the kitchen, the smallest room in the house, hoping to conserve what little heat the candles could provide. Fortunately, her gas stove still worked, so she kept pots of water boiling continuously, creating steam that offered some relief from the bitter cold. She opened the oven door and let the heat from the pilot light help warm the small space. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered to Marcus, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Mama's got food, and we're going to stay warm right here in the kitchen." The stockpile of ingredients she had bought for her restaurant became their salvation. Canned goods, dried beans, rice flour, and various seasonings lined the shelves. She had enough food to last several days, maybe even a week if she was careful. It was the one blessing in an otherwise desperate situation. By the second day, the cold had become unbearable. Kesha wrapped herself and Marcus in every piece of fabric she could find, creating a cocoon of blankets and coats around them as they huddled near the stove. The candles had burned down to stubs, and she was rationing the remaining ones carefully. Marcus had developed a slight cough that worried her constantly. She held him against her chest, feeling his small body shake with each cough, and wondered how long they could survive in these conditions. The snow outside had piled so high against the windows that it blocked most of the natural light, making the house feel like a tomb. On the third night, as she sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl like an angry beast, Kesha heard something that made her freeze. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the storm itself. But as she listened more carefully, the sound became unmistakable. Motorcycle engines, the deep, rumbling growl of multiple Harley-Davidson motorcycles cutting through the storm like mechanical thunder. The sound grew louder and closer until it seemed to surround her house completely. Through the small gap in the snow-covered window, she could see the flickering glow of headlights approaching. Who would be riding motorcycles in this weather? She whispered to herself, clutching Marcus tighter. The engines grew louder and louder until they seemed to shake the very foundation of her house. Then suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more frightening than the noise had been. Kesha's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to hear what was happening outside. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, multiple sets of boots making their way toward her front door. She could hear muffled voices, deep and rough, speaking in low tones. She couldn't quite make out what they said. Marcus stirred in her arms, awakening from his fitful sleep. Then came the knock. 3 deliberate raps on her front door that echoed through the cold house, like gunshots. Kesha's breath caught in her throat. In all her years of living in the isolated house at the end of Maple Street, no one had ever come to her door during a storm, especially not anyone riding motorcycles through a blizzard. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that carried through the wind. "Ma'am, we need help. We're freezing out here." Kesha's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Who were these people? What did they want? And why had they chosen her house of all places to stop at during the worst storm in 20 years? Marcus began to cry softly, as if he could sense his mother's fear. Kesha rocked him gently, trying to calm both him and herself as she stared at the front door and wondered if opening it would save them or destroy them. The wind howled louder, and the knock came a third time. The third knock echoed through the house like a gunshot, and Kesha felt her heart slam against her ribs. Marcus whimpered in her arm, sensing his mother's terror through the way her body had gone rigid. She pressed her back against the kitchen wall as far from the front door as she could get, while still being able to hear what was happening outside. "Please, ma'am." The voice called again, rougher now, but with an edge of desperation. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to get out of this storm." Through the gap in the snow-covered window, Kesha could make out dark shapes moving in the swirling white. The headlights of the motorcycles cut through the blizzard like angry eyes, casting long shadows that danced across her yard. She counted at least 6 or 7 bikes, maybe more. Her mind immediately went to every news story she had ever heard about motorcycle gangs, every warning her mother had given her about dangerous men who rode in packs. "Think, Kesha, think," she whispered to herself, bouncing Marcus gently as he began to fuss. She crept closer to the front window, staying low and keeping Marcus close to her chest. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. 25 men in heavy leather jackets stood in her front yard, their faces hidden behind helmets and scarves. Snow clung to their shoulders and arms, and even from inside the house, she could see how they shivered and stamped their feet against the cold. The man at the front of the group was enormous. Even bundled in winter gear, his size was intimidating. He had removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face, framed by a thick beard that was already accumulating snow. His eyes, visible even through the storm, were sharp and alert. When he looked directly at her window, Kesha ducked down quickly, her heart hammering. "We know you're in there," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "We can see the candlelight. Look, I know this is scary, but we're not going anywhere in this weather. We can either freeze to death out here, or you can let us wait it out inside. We'll leave the moment the storm passes." Kesha's hands trembled as she held Marcus tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait them out, and hope they would eventually leave. She had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know what happened when women opened their doors to strange men in the middle of the night, especially women like her, alone, vulnerable, with no one to call for help. But as she watched through the window, she saw one of the men stumble and nearly fall. Another reached out to steady him, and she could see dark stains on his pants that looked suspiciously like blood. These weren't men looking for trouble. These were men in genuine distress. Marcus coughed again, a harsh sound that reminded her how cold the house had become. If these men were suffering in the storm outside, they probably weren't much worse off than she and her son were inside. At least they had each other. She had been alone with her fear for 3 days now, and the isolation was starting to feel more dangerous than whatever waited outside her door. The memory of her mother's voice suddenly filled her mind, as clear as if she were standing right beside her. It was something her mother had said countless times during Kesha's childhood, usually when they encountered homeless people or strangers asking for help. "Baby girl, when someone's in trouble, you help them. Doesn't matter what they look like or where they come from. You help them because one day you might be the one who needs helping. The good Lord sees everything, and what you give out comes back to you tenfold." Her mother had lived by those words, even when it meant giving away their last $10 to someone who claimed they needed bus fare, even when it meant inviting strange neighbors over for dinner when they looked hungry, even when her father had complained that she was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people who might not deserve it. "Help the traveler in need," her mother had always said, "even if he looks like your enemy." Kesha looked down at Marcus, who was staring up at her with complete trust in his dark eyes. He was depending on her to make the right choice, to keep him safe and warm. But keeping him safe might mean taking a risk that terrified her to her core. Another knock came, gentler this time. "Ma'am, We've got a man out here who's hurt pretty bad. He's been bleeding for hours, and the cold isn't helping. I'm begging you. Just until the storm passes. We'll sleep on the floor. We won't touch anything. We just need to get warm." Kesha closed her eyes and tried to think clearly. She could hear the pain in the man's voice now, the genuine desperation. These weren't the voices of predators. These were the voices of people who were as scared and cold as she was. She stood up slowly, careful not to startle Marcus, who was watching her every move with worried eyes, and walked toward the front door. Her legs felt like jelly, and every step seemed to take forever. When she reached the door, she pressed her forehead against the cold wood and tried to summon courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "Are you really hurt?" she called through the door. "Yes, ma'am. Danny here took a bad spill about 10 miles back. We've been trying to find shelter ever since." "How many of you are there?" 25, ma'am. "I know that sounds like a lot, but we stick together. We don't leave anyone behind." 25. The number hit her like a physical blow. 25 strange men in her tiny house with her and her baby. It was either the most foolish thing she could possibly do, or it was exactly what her mother would have done in the same situation. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand, his fingers cold but gentle. He babbled something unintelligible, but his tone was encouraging, as if he were trying to tell her everything would be okay. "Mama's scared, baby," she whispered. "But maybe being scared isn't always wrong. Maybe sometimes you have to be scared and brave at the same time." She took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and slowly opened the door. The man standing directly in front of her was even larger than she had imagined. His leather jacket was covered in patches and pins she didn't recognize, and his beard was streaked with gray. But when their eyes met, she saw something she hadn't expected. Kindness, exhaustion, gratitude, and beneath it all, a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his intimidating appearance. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm Mike. We won't forget this." Behind him, the other 24 men stood in the swirling snow, waiting for permission to enter. They looked like a scene from a movie about outlaws and rebels. But as Kesha looked closer, she saw what Mike saw: men who were cold, tired, and genuinely grateful for her kindness. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come in before you all freeze to death." As the first man stepped across her threshold, shaking snow from his jacket and stomping his boots on her doormat, Kesha realized she had just made a decision that would change everything. For better or worse, she was no longer alone. One by one, the 25 men filed through Kesha's front door, each one carefully wiping their boots on the small mat before stepping inside. What struck her immediately was how quietly. A secret shared in whispers carried on the wind, promising solace and perhaps a new beginning. But at what cost, and for whom? They entered her life as shadows in the storm, their presence a stark contrast to the quiet desperation she had grown accustomed to. Each movement deliberate, a silent pledge not to frighten her or the small boy, Marcus. These were not the reckless outlaws of the silver screen, but men who moved with the measured grace of soldiers, their leathers concealing a disciplined core. Mike, the last to enter, secured the door, a gesture meant to ward off the biting cold. But in Kesha's eyes, it mirrored a deeper need for safety, a desire to keep the world at bay. The house, already small, felt impossibly confined with the arrival of these 25 men, their presence filling every available space. Yet, instead of chaos, a reverent silence descended, each man taking in the simple beauty of her home. Helmets were removed, gloves shed, revealing faces weathered by time and circumstance, etched with stories untold, yet somehow not unkind. A young man, his voice barely audible, offered a simple "thank you," a sentiment that resonated far beyond the walls of her humble abode. "You have no idea what this means." Marcus, peeking from behind his blankets, his eyes wide with curiosity, not fear, became the center of their quiet attention. A man with graying temples, his eyes gentle and warm, offered a shy wave, a silent greeting that transcended the boundaries of their disparate lives. "Is that your little boy?" he asked, his voice soft as a lullaby. "Yes, that's Marcus. He's 2. A smile touched the man's lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes with genuine warmth. "Beautiful child. I'm Tommy. I've got grandkids about his age." Kesha felt a knot of tension loosen in her chest. Tommy looked more like a doting grandfather than a hardened criminal, his leather jacket worn and patched, yet meticulously clean, his beard neatly trimmed, his smile a beacon of gentle affection. Mike stepped forward, his gait revealing a hidden injury, a limp that spoke of battles fought and scars carried. "Ma'am, I need to be straight with you about something. We've got a man here who's hurt pretty bad. Danny took a spill on the ice about 10 miles back, and he's been bleeding ever since. Do you have any first aid supplies?" Her gaze followed Mike's, landing on a young man slumped on her couch, his face pale, his jeans stained with ominous dark patches. His hands trembled, a silent testament to the pain he endured. "I have some things," she replied, her instinct taking over as she moved towards the bathroom, a healer answering a silent call. She returned with a plastic container, her hands steady as she gathered bandages, antiseptic, and medical tape. Kneeling beside Danny, she saw his youth reflected in his pain-glazed eyes, his vulnerability tugging at her heartstrings. He winced as she gently examined his wound, but he didn't pull away, a silent acceptance of her touch. "This is pretty deep," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "He really should see a doctor." "Can't get to one in this storm," Mike replied, his voice tight with frustration. "Roads are completely blocked. We've been trying to get him help for hours." Kesha looked at Danny's face, his pain etched like a sorrowful melody, and made a decision. "I can clean it and bandage it, but you need to keep pressure on it to stop the bleeding." Her hands moved with practiced grace as she cleaned the wound, applying antiseptic with a gentle touch, her focus unwavering. The other men watched in silence, their eyes on her, not with threat, but with a profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of her compassion. "You're good at this," Danny whispered, his voice weak. "My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant," Kesha replied, her voice soft and reassuring. "She taught me a few things." While she tended to Danny's injury, the others moved with a quiet understanding, organizing themselves without a word, securing the perimeter as if it were second nature. A man with a thick southern accent approached her, his voice respectful. "Ma'am, would it be all right if we made some food? We've got some rations in our packs, and it looks like you've got ingredients here. We could make enough for everyone." "Please, call me Kesha," she replied, finishing Danny's bandage. "And yes, I've got plenty of food. I was trying to run a restaurant out of here." Mike's eyebrows rose with interest. "A restaurant? What kind of food?" "Soul food. My mother's recipes. Fried chicken mostly." Tommy's face lit up with a grin. "Your mother's fried chicken? Well, now we're talking. Haven't had real home cooking in months." As the evening unfolded, something extraordinary began to happen. The kitchen became a symphony of quiet activity, filled with the sounds of cooking and hushed conversation. These hardened men, surprisingly skilled in the culinary arts, worked together, blending Kesha's ingredients with their own trail rations, creating a feast that warmed not only their bodies, but also their souls. The aroma of seasoned chicken and simmering vegetables permeated the cold house, infusing it with a warmth and vitality that had been absent for far too long. Marcus, drawn by the tantalizing smells and the gentle hum of voices, emerged from his hiding place, his eyes wide with wonder. Tommy, sitting cross-legged on the floor, began teaching him how to build towers with empty food cans, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he guided the toddler's movements. Other men joined in, their weathered faces softening as they played simple games, their laughter filling the room with a healing joy. "He's a smart one," observed Jake, watching Marcus stack the cans with intense concentration. "Reminds me of my nephew back in Tennessee." As they gathered around Kesha's small table and spilled onto the floor to eat, a sense of shared humanity enveloped them all. Mike cleared his throat, his voice serious. "Kesha, I think we owe you an explanation about who we are and why we were out in this storm." She looked around at the assembled faces, some young, some old, all watching her with intense expressions. "We're mostly veterans," Mike began. "Army, Marines, Navy. We served together in different units over the years. And when we came home, we found it hard to fit back into regular life. The brotherhood we had over there, the sense of purpose, it was hard to find that in the civilian world. So, we found each other," Tommy added, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Started riding together, taking care of each other the way we did in service." "We're not a gang," Jake said firmly. "We don't deal drugs or hurt people. We're just men who needed a family, and we made one for ourselves. Danny, looking much improved after the food and medical attention, spoke from his spot on the couch. We were writing to a Christmas gathering in Chicago. All the chapters from the Midwest come together every year to do charity work, toys for kids, food for families who need it. The storm caught us by surprise, Mike continued. Weather reports said it wouldn't hit until tomorrow. We were trying to make it to a motel when Danny's bike hit that patch of ice. Kesha listened to their stories with growing astonishment, the reality of their lives far removed from the image society had painted. These were men who had served their country, struggled to find their place in a world that often misunderstood them, and created their own support system to help each other survive. I know what people think when they see us, Mike said quietly. The leather, the bikes, the tattoos, they see outlaws and troublemakers, but we're not. We're just trying to take care of our own and maybe help some other people along the way. A familiar ache resonated in Kesha's chest, the sting of being judged by appearances, of having assumptions made about her based on circumstance. Mrs. Henderson's cruel words, the employers who wouldn't hire her, the neighbors who crossed the street, all flashed through her mind. I understand, she said softly. People look at me and see a single black mother in a poor neighborhood, and they think they know everything about me. They think I'm lazy or irresponsible, or that I must have done something wrong to end up where I am. The room fell silent, the crackling of candles and the howl of wind the only sounds that dared to break the fragile peace. Mike's eyes, once focused, now held a distant sorrow, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the walls of her small house. I had a daughter once, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Emily, she was 6 years old, beautiful little girl with blonde pigtails and the biggest smile you ever saw. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap, a silent struggle against the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. Leukemia took her 3 years ago, fought for 18 months, but the cancer won. The men shifted uncomfortably, their silence a sign of respect for the pain he rarely shared. Her mother blamed me, he continued, his voice raw with anguish. Said if I'd been a better provider, if I'd had better insurance, maybe we could have gotten her into better treatment programs, maybe she'd still be alive. His voice cracked, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. After Emily died, my wife left, said she couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. Tears welled in Kesha's eyes, her heart aching for his profound loss. Mike, I'm so sorry. Point is, Mike said, meeting her gaze, his eyes filled with a desperate vulnerability. People think they know why I ride with these guys, think it's because I'm running from responsibility or looking for trouble. Truth is, I'm running from an empty house and a marriage that died with my little girl. These men, they're the only family I have left. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in the room, releasing a torrent of shared pain. Kesha found herself speaking before she could stop herself, compelled to share her own story. My husband left 8 months ago, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. Jerome said he couldn't handle the pressure of being a father, couldn't handle being poor, said he needed to find himself. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Turns out he found himself with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee. Did he ever see Marcus, help support him? Tommy asked gently. Not once, not a phone call, not a dollar, nothing. It's like we never existed. Kesha wiped her eyes, her heart heavy with unshed tears. People see me struggling, and they assume I picked a bad man, or that I was careless, or that I'm just another statistic. They don't see that I loved someone who promised to love me back, and that I'm doing everything I can to give my son a good life. Sometimes life just breaks people, Mike said simply. And sometimes it breaks the people who love them, too. The shared pain settled over the room like a warm blanket, a silent understanding that transcended their differences. These were people who knew loss, who knew what it meant to have the world judge you for circumstances beyond your control. But you opened your door anyway, Mike said, his voice filled with gratitude. Even though you were scared, even though you had every reason not to trust us. My mother always told me to help people who were in trouble, Kesha replied, her voice filled with conviction. She said that when you turn away from someone who needs help, you're really turning away from yourself. Marcus had fallen asleep in Tommy's lap, his small body relaxed and peaceful, a picture of innocence amidst the shared pain. The sight of her son sleeping safely in the arms of a man she had once feared filled Kesha's eyes with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I haven't felt this safe in my own home for a long time." Mike nodded solemnly. "Neither have we, Kesha, neither have we." Outside, the storm raged on, a relentless force of nature. But inside the small house at the end of Maple Street, 25 strangers and a single mother had found something precious and rare, a place where they could simply be human beings, taking care of each other, sharing their stories, and finding solace in their shared vulnerability. As the evening wore on, the small house settled into an unusual but comfortable rhythm, the bikers arranging themselves throughout the living room and kitchen, finding comfort in the shared space. Candlelight flickered across their weathered faces, softening their features, revealing expressions of genuine contentment. For the first time in months, Kesha's house felt truly warm, not just from the body heat of so many people, but from something deeper, something more profound. The loneliness that had been her constant companion seemed to lift, the weight on her shoulders lessening with each shared smile, each kind word. She moved through her own home with a lightness she had almost forgotten existed, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Marcus, completely captivated by Tommy, had claimed him as his new best friend, insisting on showing him every toy he owned, chattering away in the half-words and gestures that only 2-year-olds could master. Tommy listened with unwavering patience, responding to Marcus babbling as if it were the most important conversation he had ever had, his eyes filled with a tenderness that belied his tough exterior. "He's got good instincts about people," Mike observed, watching Marcus attempt to braid Tommy's beard. "Kids always know. He's been so lonely," Kesha said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "It's just been the two of us for so long. He's not used to having this many people around, but he seems to love it." "We all do," said Jake from his spot near the window. "Been a long time since any of us sat around a family table like this." Danny, resting comfortably on the couch, his color much improved, had been dozing peacefully, but around midnight, Mike noticed a change, a restlessness in his sleep, small sounds of discomfort that alerted him to a deeper problem. He approached Danny quietly, placing his hand on his forehead, his touch revealing a burning heat. "Guys, wake up," Mike called urgently, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. "Danny's burning up with fever." The men stirred immediately, their military training kicking in as they responded to the alarm in their leader's voice. Within seconds, they were gathered around the couch, their faces etched with concern as they looked down at their friend. "What do we do?" asked Pete, his voice tight with worry. "This is bad, Mike, really bad. Should we try to get him to a hospital?" suggested Jake. "Maybe the roads are clear enough now." Mike shook his head grimly, his expression grim. "Roads are still blocked solid. I checked an hour ago. We're not getting anywhere until this storm passes completely." Tommy knelt beside the couch, touching Danny's face gently. "He's burning up. This isn't just a regular fever. In Afghanistan, when guys got fever like this, the medics would," one of the younger men started, his voice trailing off helplessly. "But we don't have any medics here. We need to cool him down somehow," said Mike, his voice laced with uncertainty. "But I don't know how. Hell, I don't know anything about taking care of sick people." The men looked at each other with growing panic, the helplessness in their eyes a stark contrast to their usual stoicism. These were tough individuals who had faced combat, who had survived dangerous situations around the world, but the sight of their friend burning up with fever had reduced them to confused anxiety. "What if he gets worse?" whispered Pete, his voice trembling. "What if we lose him?" "We're not losing anybody," Mike said firmly, his voice filled with a forced confidence. From her spot in the kitchen, Kesha had been listening to their increasingly desperate conversation, watching these strong men struggle with their friend's condition, saw the genuine terror in their eyes at the thought of losing Danny. Their helplessness was heartbreaking, a reminder of her own vulnerability. She stepped forward quietly, her voice calm and steady. "Mike, I can help." All 24 men turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of hope and desperation. "You know about this stuff?" Mike asked, not bothering to hide the relief in his voice. "Some. My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant. She taught me how to handle fevers and basic medical care." "Please," said Tommy, his voice breaking slightly. "We don't know what to do. We'll try anything." Kesha looked around at the circle of worried faces, seeing not hardened bikers, but frightened men desperate to save their friend. They reminded her of Marcus when he was scared and looking to her for comfort. "It's okay," she said, her voice filled with reassurance. "Fever is the body's way of fighting infection. We just need to keep him cool and make sure he stays hydrated." She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a basin of cool water and several washcloths. Settling herself on the edge of the couch beside Danny, she began gently bathing his face and neck with the cool cloths, her touch soothing and comforting. "Danny, honey, can you hear me?" she said softly, her voice laced with gentle concern. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Where am I?" "You're safe," Kesha replied, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used with Marcus when he was sick. "You're in my house, and your friends are here. You have a fever, but I'm going to take care of you." For the next several hours, Kesha moved tirelessly between the kitchen and the living room, boiling water for tea, preparing cool compresses, and monitoring Danny's temperature. The other bikers watched her work with something approaching awe, their eyes filled with admiration for her skill and compassion. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands steady and sure as she tended to their friend, her presence a calming influence in the face of their growing anxiety. "Mama," Danny mumbled during one of his delirious moments, reaching out blindly. Without hesitation, Kesha took his hand in hers, her touch maternal and comforting. "I'm here, baby, you're going to be fine." Mike stood in the doorway, watching this exchange, his expression unreadable, a mixture of emotions flickering across his face. When Kesha looked up and caught his eye, she saw something there that made her heart skip a beat, a flicker of something deeper than gratitude. Respect, certainly, and gratitude, but also recognition, as if he was seeing something in her that he had been looking for, but hadn't expected to find. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Danny's fever finally broke. His breathing became easier, and the tight lines of pain around his eyes relaxed. Kesha felt his forehead one more time and smiled with relief. "He's going to be okay," she announced to the room full of anxious men. "The fever's broken. He should sleep peacefully now." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, the tension dissipating like morning mist. Pete wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his relief palpable, and Tommy patted Kesha's shoulder with gentle gratitude. "You saved his life," Mike said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "We wouldn't have known what to do." "He saved mine, too," Kesha replied, her voice soft but firm. "All of you did. I haven't felt this useful, this needed, in a very long time." As dawn approached, the storm outside finally began to show signs of weakening, the wind dying down to a steady whisper, the snow falling more gently. The men began to stir, checking the weather and discussing their departure, their movements filled with a quiet anticipation. Mike found Kesha in the kitchen, where she was preparing coffee and scrambled eggs for breakfast, her hands moving with a familiar grace. "We'll be leaving soon," he said, his voice serious but gentle. "Roads should be passable in a few hours." Kesha nodded, surprised by how much the thought of their departure saddened her. She had only known these men for a night, but in that short time, they had filled her house with laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging she had long forgotten. "I'll pack some food for the road. You've got a long ride ahead of you." "Kesha," Mike said, his voice filled with sincerity. "What you did for us, for Danny, we don't forget things like that. We take care of people who take care of us." She looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, meeting his intense gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have done the same." Mike shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with an unwavering conviction. "No, they wouldn't. Most people would have left us out in that storm. Most people see us and cross to the other side of the street. But you opened your door, you fed us, you healed our friend, you treated us like family. You are family," Kesha said simply, her voice filled with sincerity. "At least you feel like family to me." When the time came for them to leave, the goodbye was more emotional than anyone had expected, filled with heartfelt gratitude and unspoken promises. Each man shook Kesha's hand or hugged her gently, thanking her with words that seemed inadequate for what they were trying to express. Marcus cried when Tommy had to leave, clinging to the older man's leather jacket with heartbreaking determination, his small hands grasping for a connection he didn't want to lose. "I'll see you again, little man," Tommy promised, his own voice thick with emotion. That's a promise. Mike was the last to leave, his eyes lingering on Kesha's face as he pressed an envelope into her hands, despite her protests. It's not charity, he said firmly. It's payment for services rendered. You're a healer, and healers deserve to be compensated for their work. I can't take your money, Kesha said, trying to hand the envelope back. You can, and you will. We don't leave debts unpaid. His expression softened slightly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Besides, that little restaurant of yours, the one with your mother's recipes, don't give up on it. Good food and good hearts like yours will find their way to each other. Kesha stood in her doorway, holding Marcus on her hip, watching 25 motorcycles disappear into the gray morning, their rumble fading into the distance, leaving behind a profound silence. The envelope in her pocket felt heavy with possibility, but heavier still was the knowledge that she was once again alone, the house seeming to shrink around her as the warmth of their presence faded. She and Marcus ate breakfast in a kitchen that seemed too big for just two people, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware and Marcus' occasional babbling. But something had changed during the night, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The loneliness was still there, a familiar ache in her heart, but it felt different now, less like a permanent condition and more like a temporary state of being, a hurdle she could overcome. Mama, Marcus said, pointing towards the door, his eyes filled with a hopeful longing. Friends, come back. Kesha looked at her son's trusting face and smiled, her heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose. I don't know, baby, but if they need us, I think they will. She opened the envelope Mike had given her and gasped, her breath catching in her throat. There was more money inside than she had made in 3 months at any of her previous jobs, enough to pay her rent, fix her heater, and maybe even buy some proper equipment for her restaurant. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. But more valuable than the money was the note written in Mike's careful handwriting, a simple message that touched her soul. For Mama Kesha, who showed us what family really means. We won't forget the brotherhood. For the first time in years, Kesha Williams went to bed believing that tomorrow might be better than today, the echoes of laughter and kindness filling her dreams. 3 days after the Hells Angels had vanished into the gray morning, Kesha's house felt like a tomb, the silence pressing against her ears with an almost physical weight, broken only by Marcus' occasional babbling as he played with his toys, his innocent joy a poignant reminder of the warmth she had briefly experienced. She had grown so accustomed to the sound of 25 voices, the gentle rumble of conversation, and the warmth of shared meals that the emptiness now felt suffocating, a void that threatened to consume her. The money Mike had left sat on her kitchen table in neat stacks. $800, more than she had seen at one time in years, enough to pay the overdue electric bill, buy groceries for a month, maybe even fix the heater, a tangible symbol of their generosity. But somehow, looking at those bills felt like staring at the remnants of a beautiful dream that was already fading. The magic of their night together dissipating into the harsh reality of her everyday life. She had tried to restart her restaurant business, using some of the money to buy fresh ingredients and making a new sign for her window, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope. But the cruel reality hadn't changed, the weight of her circumstances holding her back. In 3 days, exactly 0 customers had walked through her door, the silence of her empty storefront a constant reminder of her failure. The smell of her mother's fried chicken had filled the house with hope and memory, a comforting aroma that evoked a sense of nostalgia and love. But hope didn't pay bills, and memory didn't feed a hungry child, the stark truth of her situation weighing heavily on her shoulders. By the 4th day, the food she had prepared was beginning to spoil, a visual representation of her dwindling resources, her hope fading with each passing hour. Marcus had developed a cold that made him fussy and clingy, crying for hours despite her efforts to comfort him, his discomfort adding to her growing despair. The house felt colder somehow, as if the warmth the bikers had brought with them had been sucked out through the cracks in the walls when they left, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. Mama, hungry. Marcus whimpered from his high chair, his voice filled with a desperate plea that tore at Kesha's heart, a reminder of the responsibility she carried, the weight of providing for her son pressing down on her with crushing force. It began with a plate, barely touched, a small mountain of scrambled eggs pushed aside as if it held a secret too bitter to swallow. Kesha watched, a knot tightening in her stomach with each meal Marcus refused. 3 in a row, and the panic was a rising tide threatening to drown her. The refrigerator yawned open, revealing its meager offerings, a landscape of scarcity. Milk, nearly gone, a stark reminder of the bills that stretched further than her meager funds allowed. The sight of her child, her life, refusing food because illness had stolen his appetite, was a vice around her heart. "Come on, baby," she pleaded, her voice a soft melody laced with desperation, trying again to coax a spoonful between his lips. "Just a little bit for Mama." But Marcus only turned away, the refusal blossoming into a thin, heartbreaking wail that echoed off the empty walls, a symphony of sorrow. His nose ran, his small body trembling with each sob, a fragile ship caught in a storm. Kesha scooped him up, holding him close, feeling the alarming heat radiating from his skin, the fever's insidious embrace. Her gaze fell on the small pile of money on the table, her lifeline, now a cruel choice. Medicine and food for Marcus, or the rent looming like a shadow 2 weeks away. There wasn't enough for both. The question was a wound. Her son always and forever. She bundled Marcus in his warmest coat, a shield against the biting afternoon air, and stepped outside. The walk to Mrs. Henderson's house felt like a descent into darkness, her hope dwindling with each step, but she had nowhere else to turn. Mrs. Henderson, the closest neighbor, a woman whose face was etched with disapproval, was now her only chance. The house stood immaculate, a testament to order and prosperity, the lawn a vibrant green even in winter, a stark contrast to the neglect that clung to Kesha's own yard. She climbed the steps, Marcus heavy on her hip, his fevered face buried against her shoulder, and knocked. The door opened on the third knock, Mrs. Henderson's expression souring the moment she recognized Kesha. "What do you want?" she demanded, dispensing with even a semblance of courtesy. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my son is sick. I was wondering if you might have some children's medicine I could borrow, or maybe just a little milk. I can pay you back as soon as I can." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Henderson's voice was a shard of ice, sharp enough to shatter glass. "I told you before, I don't want anything to do with your kind of trouble." "Please," Kesha begged, the desperation in her voice raw and exposed. "He's just a baby. He has a fever, and I need to get some medicine in him. But I can't afford both medicine and milk, and he won't take the medicine without. That's not my problem." Mrs. Henderson began to close the door, the act of final, crushing blow. Kesha stepped forward, her hand reaching out instinctively, a desperate plea. "Wait, please. I'm begging you. Just this once. I'll do anything." Mrs. Henderson's face twisted with disgust, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "Get your hands off my door, and get off my property before I call the police." "Mrs. Henderson, please. He's burning up. I said get off my property." The older woman shoved Kesha backward with surprising force, catching her off balance from the weight of Marcus. Kesha stumbled down the steps, the world tilting, and fell hard onto the unforgiving frozen sidewalk. Marcus screamed as they hit the ground, a piercing sound that tore at Kesha's heart, and a sharp pain shot through her elbow where it had struck the concrete. "Stay away from decent people," Mrs. Henderson called from her doorway, her voice laced with venom. "Take your bastard child and your welfare problems somewhere else. This is a respectable neighborhood." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in Kesha's chest like a physical blow, sealing her fate. She sat on the cold sidewalk, cradling her crying son, the sting of tears on her cheeks mingling with the deeper ache of humiliation and despair. "Mama hurt," Marcus sobbed, reaching up to touch her face, his small hand of fragile comfort. "I know, baby. Mama's hurt too." She struggled to her feet, her elbow throbbing, her pride shattered into pieces she wasn't sure she could ever reassemble. The walk home stretched into an eternity, Marcus' weight seeming to increase with every step, the cold seeping through her worn coat like a living thing, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. As she passed the last house on the block, a voice called out from behind, a beacon in the gathering gloom. "Honey, are you all right?" Kesha turned to see an elderly black woman standing in the doorway of a small house, a house she had never really noticed before. The woman, seemingly in her 70s, had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that radiated warmth and concern. "I saw what happened over there," the woman said, stepping out onto her porch despite the cold. "That Henderson woman is nothing but meanness wrapped up in Sunday clothes. You come here, child. Both of you look like you need some help." Kesha hesitated, the memory of the recent rejection still raw, kindness feeling like a foreign language. But Marcus was still burning with fever, and she was out of options. "I don't want to be any trouble," she said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Trouble?" The woman laughed, a warm sound that seemed to chase away some of the encroaching darkness. "Honey, helping folks in need isn't trouble. It's what we're supposed to do. I'm Martha, and you're coming inside right now before that baby catches pneumonia." Martha's house was small but immaculate, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and something else, something that tugged at Kesha's memory, a faint echo of her mother's kitchen. "Family, love, home. Sit yourself down right there," Martha instructed, pointing to a comfortable armchair near the fireplace. "Let me look at this little angel." Martha examined Marcus with the gentle expertise of someone who had raised children of her own. She checked his temperature, looked in his throat, and listened to his breathing with an old stethoscope she pulled from a kitchen drawer. "He's got a little cold, but nothing that won't clear up with some rest and proper care," she announced. "I've got children's medicine in the bathroom, and there's fresh milk in the refrigerator. You just sit tight while I get everything together." Kesha watched in amazement as Martha bustled around her kitchen, preparing warm milk with honey, gathering medicine, and even wrapping up some of the fresh bread she had been baking. The older woman moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for others, her kindness a warm balm on Kesha's wounded spirit. "Why are you helping us?" Kesha asked quietly as Martha handed her the medicine for Marcus. Martha paused, her hand touching a silver necklace that hung around her neck. It was an unusual piece, old-looking, with intricate engravings that caught the firelight. "Because I know what it's like to be alone and scared with a sick child," Martha said simply, her eyes filled with a lifetime of stories. "And because my mama always told me that kindness comes back to you when you need it most." She pressed a small envelope into Kesha's hands along with a bag of groceries. "This should help with whatever bills are pressing on you. And don't you dare try to refuse it. I've got more money than I need and no children to spend it on." Marcus had already begun to perk up after taking the medicine, his attention now captivated by a small music box Martha had given him to play with. The sight of her son smiling for the first time in days brought tears to Kesha's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't need to thank me, honey. You just take care of that beautiful baby, and remember that there are still good people in this world. More good than bad, even if it doesn't always feel that way." As Kesha walked home with Marcus in her arms and Martha's gifts in her hands, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. She didn't know that 3 days later her quiet street would be filled with the thunder of 1,500 motorcycles, or that the kindness Martha had shown her would turn out to be connected to the kindness she had shown 25 strangers in a snowstorm. Sometimes, the universe works in ways that are too perfect to be coincidence, weaving a tapestry of connection and redemption. And sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion create ripples that travel farther than anyone could ever imagine, transforming lives and illuminating the world with unexpected grace. 3 days had passed since Martha's kindness had pulled Kesha back from the precipice of despair. Marcus was recovering, his fever banished, his appetite roaring back with a delightful ferocity. The medicine and care had woven their healing spell, restoring him to his cheerful, inquisitive self, his babbling melodies filling the small house as he played with the toys Martha had gifted him. Kesha, mindful of Martha's gift, had spent it wisely, securing groceries and tending to the most pressing bills. The envelope had embraced $200 and a note penned in elegant cursive. "For a mother who reminds me of myself at your age. Keep your chin up, honey. Better days are coming." She was in the midst of preparing lunch when she sensed it. A tremor so delicate at first that she mistook it for a lumbering truck rumbling past on the main road. But the trembling persisted, growing stronger, radiating up through the floorboards and into the very soles of her feet. Marcus glanced up from his toys, his eyes wide with childlike curiosity. "Mama, what that?" The vibration intensified, causing the dishes in her cabinets to resonate softly, a delicate symphony of suspense. Kesha drifted toward the front window, peering through the curtains. The street appeared tranquil, ordinary. Yet, the rumbling crescendoed, deeper, more resonant, akin to distant thunder that lingered, refusing to dissipate. Then she beheld them, emerging from the distant end of Maple Street, like a mirage from another realm. Motorcycles, dozens upon dozens. No, not dozens. Hundreds. An unending procession of chrome and steel stretching into the horizon, a mechanical river flowing toward her humble abode. "Oh my God," she breathed, her hand instinctively rising to her mouth, the words a hushed prayer. As the lead motorcycles approached her house, they began to arrange themselves in precise formations along both sides of the street. Behind them, more and more poured in, transforming the quiet residential street into what resembled a staging ground for the world's grandest motorcycle rally. The earth-shattering roar of 1,500 Harley-Davidson engines created a soundscape unlike any Kesha had ever encountered, a mechanical opera that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. Marcus, having clambered onto a chair to better observe the spectacle, clapped his hands in unrestrained delight. "Big bikes, Mama, so many big bikes." Kesha stood frozen in the doorway, attempting to grasp the unfolding reality. The motorcycles continued their arrival, their riders dismounting and organizing themselves in orderly lines. These weren't a random group of bikers who had simply stumbled upon her street. This was deliberate, intentional. This was about her. The front doors of every house on Maple Street swung open as neighbors emerged, drawn by the unprecedented sight. Mrs. Henderson stood sentinel on her meticulously manicured lawn, her face pale with shock and what Kesha could have sworn was fear, casting nervous glances at the gathering spectacle. Other neighbors huddled in small clusters, gesturing and whispering, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to sheer terror. At the helm of the colossal formation, Kesha recognized a familiar figure. Mike sat astride his bike, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Tommy, Jake, Pete, and all the others who had sought refuge in her home on that snowy night. But trailing behind them were hundreds more men and women donning the same leather jackets, bearing the same patches, radiating the same air of quiet resolve. Mike dismounted and began his approach toward her house. As he moved, the 1,500 engines behind him fell silent in perfect synchronicity, creating a silence so profound it verged on the supernatural. The sudden absence of sound, paradoxically, was more impactful than the preceding thunder. "Kesha," Mike called out, his voice amplified in the stillness. "We need to talk." She stepped onto her porch, Marcus secure on her hip, feeling the collective gaze of 1,500 bikers and her curious neighbors. The enormity of the moment bore down on her like a tangible weight. Mike, what is this? Why are you all here?" He paused at the base of her steps, his expression grave, yet non-threatening. Behind him, the expansive formation of motorcycles and riders stood in military-like precision. "We told you we don't forget," he stated simply, "and we don't leave debts unpaid." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors, and Kesha noted Mrs. Henderson edging closer, her curiosity apparently eclipsing her trepidation. "I don't understand," Kesha confessed, although a part of her was beginning to suspect that something extraordinary was about to occur. Tommy stepped forward, joining Mike, carrying a large manila envelope. "Kesha, that night, you saved our lives. You fed us. You healed Danny. You treated us like family when the rest of the world treats us like criminals." "We've been busy these past 3 days," Jake added, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a solemnity. "Making calls, calling in favors, reaching out to every chapter from here to California." Mike gestured toward the assembled mass behind him. "These are our brothers and sisters from across the country, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. When we told them about what you did, about who you are, they wanted to meet you." A woman biker positioned near the front of the formation stepped forward. She was tall and exuded confidence, with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes that, in some inexplicable way, reminded Kesha of her mother. "I'm Sarah from the Chicago chapter," she announced, her voice carrying a warmth and strength. We heard about a woman who opened her door to 25 strangers in a blizzard. We heard about a mother who saved a young man's life with nothing but kindness and home remedies. Word travels fast in our community, chimed in another biker, this one from Cleveland. Stories about real kindness, real courage, they spread like wildfire. Mike reached into his jacket and produced a thick envelope. Kesha, this is from all of us. Every chapter contributed. It's enough to pay off every debt you have, fix up this house, and get your restaurant running properly. Kesha stared at the envelope, her mind struggling to process the surreal unfolding. I can't take this. It's too much. I just did what anyone would do. No, Tommy asserted firmly. You did what almost no one would do, and that makes all the difference. The distant wail of news sirens announced their impending arrival, adding to the mechanical symphony of the street. There's more, Mike continued. We've got contractors, electricians, plumbers, all riding with us. We're going to fix this house properly, transform it into the kind of restaurant it deserves to be. Sarah advanced again. And we've got a marketing plan, social media, word of mouth, food bloggers. By the time we're done, everyone in Detroit will know about Mama Kesha's kitchen. Kesha felt tears streaming freely down her cheeks as the immensity of their generosity washed over her. These individuals, who had been strangers only days before, had mobilized a network of support spanning multiple states. They had transformed her simple act of kindness into something that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for me? Mike's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment, she glimpsed not the imposing leader of a motorcycle club, but the grieving father who had lost his daughter. Because you showed us what family truly means, he said quietly. You reminded us that kindness still exists in this world. And because sometimes, when someone saves your life, you get the chance to save theirs right back. The crowd of neighbors had swelled, and Kesha observed camera phones capturing every detail. Mrs. Henderson stood on the periphery of her lawn, her face a mask of confusion mingling with what Kesha suspected was the beginnings of shame. Marcus squirmed in her arms, eager to descend and examine the motorcycles up close. Tommy stepped forward with a tender smile. Can I? He asked, and upon Kesha's nod, he gently took Marcus into his arms. The toddler instantly began pointing at the bikes, his excited chatter filling the air. Big bikes. So many big bikes. That's right, little man. Tommy responded warmly. And every single one of them came here because your mama is the bravest, kindest woman we know. As if responding to an unseen signal, the 1,500 bikers began to move. They didn't mount their motorcycles or rev their engines. Instead, they walked toward Kesha's house, each bearing something in their hands. Tools, building supplies, paint, lumber, kitchen equipment, everything required to transform her humble home into a thriving restaurant. We're going to get to work, Mike proclaimed. And we're not leaving until Mama Kesha's kitchen is ready to serve the best soul food in Detroit. And so, the transformation of Maple Street from a quiet residential lane into a construction site the neighborhood had never witnessed was about to commence. And at the center of it all stood a single mother who had opened her door to strangers in a storm, never imagining that her kindness would summon an army of angels on motorcycles. In a fleeting hour, Kesha's tranquil street had metamorphosed into something akin to a small-town festival. The 1,500 Hells Angels, demonstrating their remarkable organizational skills, had divided themselves into precise work crews, each assigned to a distinct aspect of renovating her house. Some concentrated on the exterior, others on the plumbing and electrical systems, while a dedicated team focused on expanding and modernizing her small kitchen. The neighbors, initially struck speechless, gradually emerged from their homes to witness the unprecedented spectacle. Word had quickly spread throughout the community, drawing people from blocks away who were eager to see the unfolding events. Children pressed their faces against the windows, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of so many motorcycles lined up like mechanical soldiers. Local news vans had descended, their satellite dishes reaching for the sky as reporters struggled to make sense of the extraordinary narrative unfolding before them. Camera crews captured every moment as leather-clad bikers wielded hammers and paintbrushes with the same dexterity they displayed on their motorcycles. Mrs. Henderson remained on the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, her expression a shifting kaleidoscope of confusion, fear, and the possible beginnings of a dawning recognition that she had gravely misjudged the situation. She alternated her gaze between the organized chaos unfolding in Kesha's yard and the growing throng of curious neighbors, her face pale and drawn. "I can't believe this is happening," whispered Mrs. Johnson from 2 houses down. "All these bikers, just to help one woman." "Did you hear what she did?" responded Mr. Davis, an elderly man who rarely interacted with his neighbors. "Apparently, she saved their lives during that big snowstorm last week. Fed them, took care of them when they were stranded." "Kesha did that." Mrs. Johnson's voice betrayed her surprise. "I had no idea she was even capable of." Her voice trailed off as she realized the implications of her words and how they reflected her own preconceived notions about her neighbor. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Martha appeared on the outskirts of the crowd. The elderly woman, drawn by the commotion and excitement, had made her way over from her small house. She stood at the back of the gathering, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight, observing the scene with a curious and thoughtful gaze. Kesha was standing near her front porch, still overwhelmed by the magnitude of the events unfolding around her. Marcus had been whisked away by Tommy and was currently reveling in a tour of the motorcycles, his joyful squeals audible above the sounds of construction. "This is incredible," Sarah from the Chicago chapter said, approaching Kesha with a clipboard covered in notes. "We've mapped out the kitchen renovation, planned the dining room expansion, and have enough volunteers to have everything finished by tomorrow evening." "Tomorrow?" Kesha shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. Honey, you haven't witnessed what happens when 1,500 motivated bikers decide to get something done." Sarah laughed. "We once built an entire playground in 6 hours for a children's hospital in Milwaukee." Danny emerged from the house, appearing far healthier than he had on that fateful night when his fever had raged. He was carrying a toolbox and sported paint streaks on his clothing, clear evidence of his participation in the interior renovations. Upon spotting Kesha, he made his way over, wearing a broad smile. "The kitchen is going to be amazing," he told her enthusiastically. "Professional-grade stove, expanded prep area, even a new freezer unit. You'll be able to easily accommodate 50 customers." "Danny, I still can't believe you're all doing this," Kesha said, her voice thick with gratitude. "After everything I put you through that night." "Put us through." Danny's expression reflected genuine confusion. "Kesha, you saved my life. If you hadn't known how to break that fever, I could have died in that house." As he spoke, his hand unconsciously moved to touch something at his throat. It was then that Kesha noticed he was wearing a necklace she hadn't seen before. It was silver, ancient in appearance, adorned with intricate engravings that shimmered in the light. "That's a beautiful necklace," she remarked. Danny's face softened, a hint of sadness entering his eyes. "It belonged to my mother. I lost her when I was 7. We were separated during a fire at our apartment building. This necklace was all I had left of her. The family who took me in allowed me to keep it, but I never found her again." From somewhere behind them in the crowd, a sharp intake of breath sliced through the air, a gasp so abrupt and loud that it momentarily silenced the sounds of construction and conversation. "Danny." The voice trembled, uncertain, filled with the weight of 30 years of longing and heartbreak. Everyone in the immediate vicinity turned to find the source of the sound, and there stood Martha, her face ashen and her eyes riveted on the young man's necklace. "Danny, is that you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Danny froze, his hand still resting on the silver chain at his throat. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Martha took a tentative step forward, her gaze never leaving his face. "You were 7 years old. There was a fire at the Riverside Apartments. You had a small birthmark shaped like a crescent moon just behind your left ear." Danny's hand instinctively moved to touch the spot she had identified, his eyes widening in disbelief. "How do you know about that?" he asked, his voice constricted with emotion. "Because I'm your mother," Martha replied, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mother, and I've been searching for you for 30 years. The sounds of construction seemed to recede into the distance as a hush fell over the area. Danny stared at the elderly woman, his face reflecting disbelief, hope, and the flicker of recognition. "The necklace," Martha continued, her voice gaining strength. "I gave it to you for your 7th birthday. It belonged to my grandmother. There's an inscription on the back that says, 'Love never dies.' With trembling fingers, Danny turned the pendant over, revealing the exact words Martha had spoken. The silver was worn with age, but the engraving remained visible. Mama. Danny's voice cracked on the word. 30 years of separation culminating in a single moment of recognition. Oh, my baby, Martha sobbed, rushing forward to embrace the son she had lost so long ago. Have you ever felt the subtle tug of destiny, the invisible threads weaving together lives in ways you could never imagine? Close your eyes, breathe deep, and let this story wash over you like a warm embrace, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and the healing touch of unexpected connections. 30 years, 3 decades of searching, a lifetime of wondering, a fragile hope flickering against the darkness. Then, in a single, breathtaking moment, everything shifted. Mother and son, separated by circumstance and time, collapsed into each other's arms, tears blurring the edges of a reality too beautiful to believe. Around them, a sea of leather-clad bikers and curious neighbors stood transfixed, witnessing a miracle unfold before their very eyes. Mike, a man whose weathered face held the stories of countless roads traveled, stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. Martha, you're Danny's mother. I am, Martha whispered, her embrace tightening around the son she thought she had lost forever. Tommy, another brother in this unlikely family, added simply. And you're the family that took care of him all these years. We're his brothers. And that makes you our mother, too. The weight of that moment rippled outwards, a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion. Tears flowed freely, hardened faces softened, and strangers embraced, bound together by the invisible threads of fate. A voice, shaky and disbelieving, cut through the air. It belonged to Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose heart had been closed for far too long. I don't understand, she stammered. How is this possible? What are the odds? Kesha, the woman who stood at the heart of this miracle, looked at Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had shoved her down, the woman who had refused to help. But instead of anger, she felt a profound sense of peace. Sometimes, she said softly, kindness finds its way home. Sometimes, when you help someone, you're really helping yourself without knowing it. Martha's gaze found Kesha's across the crowd. A wave of understanding washed over her. You, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. You're the woman who saved my son's life. You're the reason he survived that fever. And you're the woman who saved mine and Marcus' life when we had nowhere else to turn. Kesha smiled gently. I guess we've been taking care of each other's children without knowing it. A roar erupted, a symphony of cheers and revving engines as the Hells Angels celebrated the impossible reunion they had inadvertently orchestrated. In the span of a single week, a blizzard, an act of kindness, and a community of unlikely angels had brought together a mother and son who had been searching for each other for 3 decades. Mrs. Henderson stood at the edge of the celebration, watching the joy unfold. And for the first time in years, she began to understand the beauty she had been missing by keeping her heart closed. The reunion sparked a transformation that spread like wildfire, igniting a sense of community and belonging that had been dormant for far too long. What began as a construction project became a neighborhood festival, neighbors working alongside bikers, barriers crumbling as quickly as the walls being torn down in Kesha's house. By sunset, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Kesha's small house, once barely habitable, now boasted a proper restaurant space, complete with gleaming kitchen equipment and a cheerful sign above the door. Mama Kesha's Kitchen, where love is the secret ingredient. I can't believe this is my house, Kesha breathed, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Sarah, from the Chicago chapter, smiled. Believe it. And believe this, too. We've already got your social media account set up, and your story is spreading across the internet. You're going to have more customers than you know what to do with. Martha, tears still glistening in her eyes, took Kesha's hands. Honey, I need you to know something. When I helped you the other day, I thought I was just doing what any decent person would do. I had no idea I was helping the woman who had saved my son's life. And I had no idea the woman who saved me was Danny's mother, Kesha replied. It's like the universe was trying to tell us something. It was telling us that we're family, Martha said firmly. All of us. Mike reappeared, his leather jacket covered in construction dust, but his face glowing with satisfaction. Kesha, we need to settle some business, he said, handing her an envelope. This contains the deed to your house. It's paid off completely. No more rent, no more landlord. This place belongs to you and Marcus now. Kesha stared in disbelief. Mike, I can't accept this. It's too much. You can and you will, he insisted. A restaurant needs stability. You can't build a business if you're worried about where you're going to live. Danny stepped forward, his arm around Martha's shoulders. Besides, we're going to be regular customers. Martha's already promised to help you perfect some of the old family recipes. And I've got some stories to tell about this young man's childhood that might help you understand why he's so stubborn about taking care of people. The news crews captured every moment, and the story of the single mother who had sheltered 25 Hell's Angels and reunited a family resonated across the country. Orders poured in, people wanting to support Kesha's restaurant and be a part of something truly special. As evening approached, neighbors who had watched from a distance began to approach, carrying covered dishes and offering apologies for their past indifference. Even Mrs. Henderson, her face etched with remorse, asked for forgiveness. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice barely audible. What I did the other day, how I treated you and your son, it was inexcusable. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things. I'm ashamed of myself. Kesha offered her a gentle smile. We all have bad days, Mrs. Henderson. What matters is how we choose to move forward. Everyone's welcome at Mama Kesha's kitchen, she added, her voice filled with genuine warmth. An impromptu block party erupted, neighbors and bikers sharing food and stories, children playing, and Marcus, the unofficial mascot, charming everyone he met. Tommy fashioned him a miniature leather vest that read Little Angel on the back, and Marcus wore it with pride. Look, Mama, he exclaimed. I'm a big boy now. You sure are, baby, Kesha replied, hugging him tightly. You're the biggest, bravest boy I know. Martha orchestrated the community dinner, ensuring everyone had enough to eat and remembering everyone's name. This is what a neighborhood is supposed to feel like, she said to Kesha. This is what community really means. As the evening wound down, Mike handed Kesha a small leather journal. This contains contact information for every chapter that contributed to today. If you ever need anything at all, you call us. You're part of the family now permanently. Mike, I don't know how to thank you, Kesha said, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. You don't need to thank us, he replied. You just need to keep being who you are. Keep opening your door to people who need help. Keep showing the world what real kindness looks like. As the Hell's Angels prepared to leave, promises to stay in touch were exchanged, and Tommy told Marcus, Uncle Tommy is going to come visit all the time. And when you get big enough, maybe I'll teach you how to ride a motorcycle. The motorcycles roared to life, a symphony of engines carrying the promise of a new beginning. As the street fell quiet, Kesha stood in the doorway of her transformed home, holding Marcus close, with Martha and Danny by her side. The loneliness that had haunted her for so long was gone, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. Mama, Marcus said sleepily, are we happy now? Kesha looked around at her new family, the restaurant that would let her build a future for her son, the community that had embraced them both. Yes, baby, she whispered, her voice full of wonder and gratitude. We're happy now. Tomorrow would bring the grand opening of Mama Kesha's kitchen, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Kesha and Marcus, but for an entire community that had learned what miracles were possible when people chose kindness over fear, understanding over judgment, and love over isolation. 6 months later, the transformation of Maple Street was complete. The once divided neighborhood had become a vibrant community, children playing together, neighbors gathering for barbecues, and Mama Kesha's kitchen serving as the beating heart of it all. The walls were adorned with photographs from that miraculous day, a testament to the power of love and loyalty. The success of the restaurant exceeded everyone's expectations, attracting food critics, television networks, and countless customers who wanted to support Kesha's extraordinary story. But for Kesha, the most meaningful measure of success was the absence of the crushing loneliness that had once defined her life. Every morning, as she prepared for another busy day, she was surrounded by the warmth of her new family. Good morning, Mama Kesha, Danny would say, carrying fresh supplies from the market, his presence a constant source of support and companionship. Martha, always experimenting with new recipes, would greet her with a smile and the aroma of freshly baked biscuits. Even Mrs. Henderson, now one of the restaurant's most loyal customers, would arrive with her church group, eager to spread the word about the amazing food and the even more amazing story behind it. By noon, the restaurant would be buzzing with a diverse mix of customers, Hells Angels, suburban families, church groups, and neighborhood children, all sharing a common bond of community and belonging. Marcus, now a confident and joyful child, would move through the restaurant, charming customers with his infectious smile. Uncle Mike, he would squeal, greeting his favorite biker with a hug. I can crack eggs now. Mama says I'm a natural chef. And every month, Kesha would open her doors to underprivileged school groups, sharing not just food, but the message that kindness and community could overcome any obstacle. Tell us again about the night when all the motorcycle angels came to help you. The children would plead, eager to hear the familiar story of hope and transformation. As evening approached, Kesha would find herself by the kitchen window, watching the street where her miracle had begun. The house that had once stood isolated was now the center of a thriving community, a testament to the enduring power of kindness. You know what I think about sometimes? Martha asked one evening. All the people who are out there right now feeling lost and alone, feeling scared and abandoned, feeling angry and isolated. What about them? Kesha asked. I think about how all of them are just one act of kindness away from having their whole world change. One person willing to open their door, one stranger willing to help, one moment of choosing love over fear. It doesn't have to be a big gesture, Danny added. It can be as simple as sharing a meal, offering medicine to a sick child, or just treating someone like they matter. Kesha thought about all the ripples that had spread out from that one snowy night, the countless lives touched by a single act of compassion. Sometimes I wonder if this is what my mother meant when she used to say that helping others was really helping yourself, she mused. I thought I was just giving those men shelter from a storm, but they ended up sheltering me from a lifetime of loneliness. Mike, who had lingered after the other customers left, overheard her words. Your mother was right, he said, but she was also wrong about one thing. You didn't just help yourself. You helped all of us remember who we wanted to be. As the last of the daylight faded, Kesha walked through the restaurant one final time, absorbing the gratitude that filled every corner of the space she had built through courage, kindness, and the support of an unlikely family. Before heading upstairs, she stepped onto the front porch where it all began. The street was quiet now, lit by the warm glow of family homes. In the distance, she heard the faint rumble of motorcycles, a reminder of the brotherhood that had changed her life forever. Thank you, she whispered to the night air, addressing her words to her mother, to the universe, to the mysterious forces that had brought 25 strangers to her door at exactly the moment she needed them most. From somewhere in the darkness, the sound of motorcycles grew louder, then faded as they passed by on their way to whatever adventure awaited them next. But Kesha knew that wherever they went, they carried with them the same message that had transformed Maple Street. That kindness was never wasted, that community was stronger than isolation, and that sometimes the people who looked most different from you were exactly the family you needed. Have you ever wondered if a single act of kindness could rewrite the stars? Imagine a world where every gentle gesture blossoms into a garden of healing, where every shared meal weaves unbreakable bonds. This is the enchanting tale of Mama Kisha's kitchen, a place where love wasn't just an ingredient, but the very essence of every dish. Marcus, cradled in an embrace of unwavering support, knew that each dawn held the promise of new chances to sow seeds of compassion. Mama Kisha's kitchen was more than just a place. It was a legacy whispered on the wind. More than the delightful food, the sweet taste of success, or the extraordinary reunion it sparked, it was a gentle reminder. A reminder that even the smallest act of empathy can ripple outwards, reshaping destinies in ways we can scarcely imagine. Our story began with a solitary soul adrift in a storm, but it blossomed into something far grander, a symphony of connection. It's a testament to the profound truth that we are all intertwined, that kindness is always the guiding star, and that when we dare to open our hearts to those we perceive as strangers, we often find something extraordinary. We discover that they were never strangers at all, but simply family waiting to be found, souls destined to share a table, a laugh, a lifetime. They were simply family we hadn't met yet.